and for India too, that you don't want a situation that you're vulnerable to Sino-US changes. That is, today they're fighting, tomorrow they could be friends.
So this time your column I think takes off from the Russian foreign minister's visit to Delhi and Islamabad, which is a rarity. I mean, the double stop used to be what Americans used to do.
Yeah.
This is the first time the Russians have done it. And the sort of evolving nature of India's great power relations. And you see quite a bit of sort of positive developments in this, in the sense that we have more options now than we did before. But the first is, among this, we are closer to the US than we've ever been, or we have been in recent times at least. We still have, you say, Russia is close to China, but there's a lot in the bilateral relationship to be maintained. How far do you think in the medium term, of course not immediately because we're just coming off a border conflict, and is it important for India to do its best to establish that kind of a sort of base normalcy with the relationship with China, to balance this great power thing at a bilateral level, so it's not affected by, say, how close India is to the US or India is to Russia, in that sense?
Yeah.
That is the thing missing in the triangle in terms right now.
Yeah. No, in the case of India, China, I mean, I think the US question is a red herring in some ways. For example, they never raised the question of US-Pakistan relationship, which is much older. It was part of the America's Cold War alliances. But the difference between India, Pakistan, and the US relationships is Pakistan sorted out its bilateral dispute, largely accepted Chinese requests on the boundary in the Kashmir. They ceded territory to China. So for India and China, there is a bilateral issue. So the problems with third parties, like we had problems, China had huge problems with India-Russia relationship in the 60s and 70s. It now complains about India-US relationship. But all that won't matter if there is bilateral resolution. I think that's where we are stuck for 70 years. So as long as we don't resolve that issue, the US keep talking about the US because they've had good relationship with the US. Their economic relationship with the US even today is much bigger than India's. So I think this is, unless we fix our bilateral problems, India-China's pathway to work together is doomed, because we've tried last 30 years, put the boundary issue aside, work together. But now things have become worse because China is saying, look, I have claims on Indian boundary, I'm going to redeem it. Yeah. And that's where we are stuck. And unless that changes, I see the near-term prospects for India-China relations are going to be very difficult.
Yes. So in the second, you actually answered my second question, so I'll combine it with another one. You mentioned in the piece, which you mentioned it in passing, but I think there's a separate piece there, that India, and you've done it before, one of the ways in balancing out this great power dependence that India has feared historically is what you point out is this relationship with middle powers that we're developing. So there's Japan, South Korea, Australia most recently. How important, given the flux in great power relations that we're witnessing at this moment, how important are those relationships to be cemented, and how independent can they be of those countries' individual ties with the respective great powers?
Look, I think whether it is Australia, Japan, or treaty allies of the United States, Europe has had a long-term, that is Western Europe, is part of NATO, has had a long-term strategic relationship with the US. But today, Europeans talk about strategic autonomy because they see that, look, they wonder if the US will continue to defend them the way they have for the last 75 years. So I think Europeans are recognizing, look, they need to develop their own capabilities. They need to develop some autonomous policies. Similarly, for Japan and Australia, they're so totally dependent on the US to deal with the security challenges. But they also see that, look, they need to develop their own capabilities. They need to develop local coalitions and not be totally dependent on the US. That is, and for India too, that you don't want a situation that you're vulnerable to Sino-US changes. That is, today they're fighting, tomorrow they could be friends. So you don't want to be tied to what China and the US does, or the benign benevolence, shall we say, of Washington and Beijing. So it's good to have your own options. It's not that Japan can replace US for and have come to India, nor can India see Japan replacing the US partnership. But having these options, so you create a network that gives you some stability that can withstand the vagaries of US-China relationship. As I note in the piece, it has gone through so many changes in the last 70 years. If you remember, till the first 20 years after the Second World War, US not even recognized People's Republic of China. Then they became big buddies against Soviet Union. Today they're fighting. So I think we cannot leave it to their mercy, and that we need to create as much diversity in our relationships.
Yes, final question I'll have to ask it. Is this the freedom of navigation operation that is immediately created? Is it I mean, the government of India has been very, neither the defense nor the foreign ministries have really, they put out a very mild statement. Is it an overreaction? Is it one of those things that an exclusive economic zone seems, it is not a great breach, like it is not a breach, it's not like they came in, or are we overreacting, or are we dramatically underreacting?
No, if you see, the government has not overreacted. It's only the Twitter and the media that is very, very anxious about it. So I would say 3 levels. I think the first, in terms of the politics and optics of it, for the US to do it now and announcing it in such brazen manner is poor politics. I mean, just when you're building new relationships with India and also trying to mobilize support with Maldives, with Sri Lanka, with other Asian Indo-Pacific partners, to do this creates problems. I think, and that's what they've done. But so that is the first part. The second part, look, but the US has always done this. That is, from the time of the UNCLOS, that is United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, they have not agreed with some of its provisions, and they have sought to assert their freedom of navigation, saying that, look, what happened in the 70s when the treaty was negotiated, countries of the developing world sought to expand their territorial control on the seas, but they did not have the capacity to enforce it. And the old maritime power said, no, you can't close seas. We want it open. And within that, the UNCLOS is a committee document, like all committee documents. Particularly when it came to freedom of navigation, innocent passage, there are a lot of ambiguities. So those ambiguities have remained. And within India's own law, as some experts pointed out, there have been difficulties. So there are ambiguities. And I think there is a legal loopholes there, which I think will be with us. Finally, I would say, look, all great powers, those who have great trading powers or also build big navies, they want freedom of movement in the world. And it is the weaker countries that want to close it. Now, China wants to close the South China Sea now because it has the power. But someday when China is as powerful as the US, and when it has a large fleet operating in the Indian Ocean, I suspect it's going to do exactly the same as the United States. So where you stand depends on where you sit. So the large, big maritime powers want nobody to constrain the freedom of action. Someday in the future, do you think India builds similar navy? It's not going to let some small island country say, look, you have no right to come 200 miles next to my exclusive economic zone. So I think there is that historic inversion that is taking place. But my sense is it's time for India and US to sit down and say, look, this makes no sense to do it like this. And India, I think, has to resolve some of the differences, as Admiral Arun Prakash has written in the Expressway. We need to clarify some things rather than the sweeping generalization, assertions that India has made, which can't be enforced. So I think we need a pragmatic approach to how we think about the law and bring a consensus, at least among those Indo-Pacific partners, on how to deal with this and focus on the real problem in China. Look, in India, India's claims are not blocking anybody from moving up and down. But if China closes the South China Sea, that's going to hurt the world a lot more. So there's a problem with American legalism is legalism without political context is vacuous. And I think that's what
it read like a soldier's statement. It didn't read like it was sort of, the statement they put out had a sort of harsh edge to it, I thought, which didn't.
No, sometimes, governments, what left hand, what the top things, what bottom does. There's always that. Given the size of the
bureaucracy is big. Thanks so much. We shall do this again next week. Thanks a lot.